Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Joel Vine Show. Grateful for you being here. The idea of role playing in our relationships to children is really worth unpacking. It's worth unpacking for all of our relationships and how our perception of what duties we need to fulfill or simply the mindset we are occupying affects our ability to connect and express authentically with humans, especially small humans, when we step into a role such as parent. And all this is integrating and marinating in my head in relation to the broader idea of concepts and meaning making and how we assign labels and create neural associations based on stories, based on subjective interpretations of reality and so forth. We make meaning. This is how we create limiting beliefs. And it's how we create lenses, not just at the subconscious level, but the entire consciousness. So we filter and we step into a way of being that actually becomes a false self, that actually becomes an inhibitor to simply creating a relationship. And so when it comes to child raising, it's really worth questioning these paradigms and assumptions about what it means to be a parent. And so I invite first, when you hear the word parent, what do you notice? I notice when I say the word parent, I have particular neural associations and sensations in my body come up. I have particular assumptions there. Versus if you just say authentic self, it might feel differently, right? If you say authentic self, I imagine that feels open. For me, it feels open and free. It feels, it's a sensation that I desire to experience. We have a need for authenticity. And so it's interesting to note how even just the word / the concept of parent can create a lens, can create some sort of protective armor even, because you're not going to be yourself, you're going to be a parent, right? This can play out in all sorts of roles in business, in family, and as a friend. But I want to spotlight the idea of parent. So I've really been inviting myself to let go of the frequent use of the word parent and choosing, or letting go of the concept of parenting, even, and just as a pattern interrupt to freshen palate and shake out the old paradigm, if you will. Like instead of talking about parenting, let's talk about child raising, win-win child raising. And the main reason I've been playing with that as a phrase is so that there actually is a fresh word that doesn't automatically stimulate people's associations with the word parent. But of course, it's worth looking inward about why do I have these associations to begin with. So anyway, that's kind of like the bigger picture, the metacognition level. But to become more concrete and brass tacks here, what are the situations you put yourself in, the ways of interacting with your children that you consistently choose? And what are what is the interpersonal space like? What is being nurtured or not nurtured in relation to the child when you put on a hat of I'm the parent, and in particular, the idea of good parent versus bad parent, which sprinkles in this jackal consciousness, this right versus wrong consciousness, and shame and guilt can be associated with that when one is either viewing oneself as a bad parent or seeking to avoid the shame and guilt by ensuring one is a good parent. And so there's lots to unpack here because there's the whole concept of the role playing, and then there's the assumptions about what a good parent even is. Right? So let's start with, I guess, the very idea of role playing. So if you are in conversation, in relation with your child in day-to-day life, and you're seeking to fulfill a role of parent. And it's not to say that there's zero utility in the idea, right? Because you did choose to have the child. And so implicitly, it's your responsibility to raise the child versus some random person down the street, right? Like you had the child. Therefore, in a sense, there's utility in the concept of parent. There's a biological thing there of you actually have the same genes and so forth. You're passing down these genes and so forth. And then there's cultural implicit agreements around the responsibility to take care of that child, right? To raise that child. So that's very useful. Question is when we have an unhealthy version of the concept and the role of parent. And I believe it crosses into unhealthy very quickly in conventional parenting paradigms. And so what this can do is we end up seeing phrases, hearing phrases, saying phrases like, I am your mother, therefore. Or even if we don't say it explicitly, we're embodying it. So again, this can, if you haven't questioned your assumptions around child raising, you haven't looked at the principles of so forth that I've espoused and shared so much on the show, from the principle of self-ownership to the principle of consent to win-win relationships to respecting the child's dignity and sovereignty and free will and so forth, self-directed learning, letting go of paradigms around compulsion for children to learn things. There's a lot to unpack with that. And so if you haven't looked at that stuff, especially, you might simply be blended, to take an internal family systems therapy word, like your consciousness is blended with the role. You're not being your true self, you're becoming the parent. And so then you might have all these associations around what you need to do. So that could look like speaking in a stern voice, this authoritative voice, to put the child in his place, so to speak, even if it's subtle or mild. It's like, Timmy, we don't do that. Think about that vocal tone. Think about the way that we can change just our voice and our tonality and our timbre and our quality of tone, because we've inherited these assumptions about what a parent's job is, right? So I need to do my job, and I need to make sure that Timmy learns what it means to be in this house and to be a good person and to be a kind, considerate person, and what the rules and the boundaries are here. And you hear that tone? Hear that tone where there's this signal to the child about, I am in charge of you and I get to have the final authority about things. So this is very common, right, in conventional paradigms and for most humans right now on the planet who are responsible for raising children. And so my intention here is to invite awareness and to simply share new perspectives and new paradigms so that we can get our needs met more in abundance and so forth, and to nurture the needs of our children. And so, that having been said, yeah, we can step into these roles with tone of voice, with expectations. There's expectations that you clean your room. There's expectations that you take out the trash. There's expectations that you call grandma. There's expectations that you give your friend a birthday present for his birthday. And like, there's like these things that you need to do. And so the parent is seeking to be the cop, if you will. The parent is seeking to project and establish the expectations for the child, because at the meta level, the parent, this tall human, has an assumption about what the responsibility is, given the situation of you chose to have a child and you're responsible for raising that child and taking care of that child. And now there's all these unchecked assumptions, there's all these associations, there's all these stories, there's all these beliefs, and even fears, right, around what happens if you did not fulfill that role, which we can unpack in a bit. But the point here is that let's bring awareness to the actual mindsets that people can step into. So it's expectations, it's tone of voice, it's expectations, and certain outcomes that the parent is, again, seeking to ensure happen. That could be doing homework, that could be eating broccoli, that could be giving grandma a hug. I remember when I was a child, that was really unnerving. What's the word? It was unsettling, and I felt uneasy, and I really did not want to talk to my grandma on the phone. I remember this. This was a whole thing where these parts of me sort of shriveled up in response to her. I'm not entirely sure the genesis of this. I just remember it was this involuntary response, and my father would be on the phone with his mom, my grandma, and then there was this moment when, okay, grandma wants to talk to you now. And I just remember these parts of me just feeling squeamish and not wanting to do it. But there was this expectation, and then it was this whole dynamic, looking back on it, of my dad's entire, like, flawed psychology, if you will, when it comes to his people pleasing, and particularly people pleasing of both his mom and his wife. And then that's something I've reflected on quite a bit, but I realized that he was succumbing to her will and then passing down that expectation as well. So, and by the way, in his words, he told me directly, has told me in the past directly, that his mother was, in his words, domineering. And so that was one of his biggest struggles in life, was actually that relationship to her. And so I remember that getting passed down, in the sense that for whatever reason, I didn't, and maybe it was just intuition about this person known as my grandma, and some of her coercive parts, that I just didn't feel desire to really interact with her. Actually, these parts of me did. I think there were other parts of me that, these parts of me did not. And then there are other parts of me that appreciated the warmth that she did have, that sort of grandma warmth. But I just remember these parts of me were sort of repulsed and like wanted to go hide when this was presented to me, to go talk to grandma on the phone. And then I often would just reluctantly, and then, she would say things like, I think she would say things to me like, do you love me? Or something like that. And it was like this whole thing where it's like, obviously she was looking for the right answer, right? And so there was this whole expectation that I tell grandma that I love her and things like that. And I just didn't like it. There's parts of me that really wanted autonomy, that wanted respect, that wanted authenticity. That was completely absent, right? Because this conventional parenting paradigm was in play. of like the child is just sort of has these expectations to do the parents and the grandparents' bidding even, right? So anyway, all this is to say that there was this role playing of parent often just shows up in these day-to-day experiences where there's these notions and beliefs that like, be a good son, be a good parent. In the case of my grandma, like my dad was fulfilling, he probably had some belief structures around, well, family matters. It's important to be in contact with your family, to talk to them, to express that you love them, and like all these things. And I understand like this is the history of humanity is like tribal kinship. I get that. But the thing also about the history of humanity is that we have a lack of self-esteem and individuality. And so this is the evolution process here, is bringing awareness to the role playing and the conformity to expectations, and instead choosing self-esteem, choosing self-authenticity, choosing self-assertiveness and self-expression. And so then we can actually cultivate tribal kinship through authentic relationships. So this is the whole new paradigm here. We don't need to set aside or bypass or sacrifice those needs for the group connection and group belonging and group support that can come from humans that are living with each other, that share DNA, and all those things are actually quite wonderful. And so there's opportunity in the nuclear family and so forth is actually to create an incredible paradigm and atmosphere of all these needs getting met in totality. We have the support and connection, companionship and love and the community, if you will, of the family system. And we have the needs for authenticity and openness and choice and consent and so forth, where that autonomy, that sovereignty is respected. And so this is all, again, we're bringing back awareness of what are the inherited assumptions about what it means to be a parent. What are the inherited assumptions that you haven't questioned, consciously or subconsciously? There's both layers. So I guess you need to start somewhere, right? If you've never thought about this at all, then it's like, oh, wait, wow, oh, I realized that I step into these roles. And that's at the conscious level and beginning to shed some of that. We also want to let it go at the subconscious level, because you might consciously be on board with the idea of authentic win-win relationship with your children rather than stepping into roles. But then some part of you can take over and you can step back. If you haven't integrated that part of you, you can revert back to the default setting and the default impulses. And that's completely understandable because of how much this is the water in which we swim and the culture. We learn. We not only learn as children beliefs about ourselves, we create beliefs about ourselves that we inherit from the domestication and conditioning process. We also create beliefs about children. I think we just create specific beliefs about what it means to be a child, and we create that when we are a child, and then we never integrate that. If we don't integrate that and let that go, and then that subconscious part of us is still in the psyche, even when we're adults. And so we subconsciously are maybe viewing a child as, for example, less capable or less intelligent or not able to make decisions or not able to have autonomy and consent and choice and these types of things. And so those can be the default impulses, right? So again, the tone of voice thing, it can be very, I've noticed this in myself in my experience with children as well. This tendency to speak in more of a different tone towards a younger child. But I think what actually a child wants is authentic relating, and to be treated with respect and as a full status person. And so just speak as a human. Just don't change the way you speak to your child versus the way you speak to your friend. Now, there could be certain things that, like certain words they might not understand, And there's certain, if you're trying to explain a concept, you might want to use simpler language or whatever. That's fair, but it's just like these roles that we can step into. Oh, I'm the parent that's going to give you wisdom, and you're a child that doesn't know that much. So let me speak down to you. So that could be lecturing. That could be projecting expectations. That could even be consoling and giving empathy. And there can be a sense of infantilization. And so there's all these subtle ways, or not so subtle ways, that we step into roles. And we diminish our authenticity. I think what a child really wants is just have a genuine relationship. And the genuine relationship is based on honesty. It's based on trust. It's based on respect. So when we clutter that through role playing, whether that's forcing your child to brush their teeth or do math homework or call grandma or take out the trash, and there's these expectations and these roles that we step into because we're trying to fulfill it, then it sacrifices the authenticity. Doesn't mean that you wouldn't ever request that your child to take out the trash. It doesn't mean that your needs matter less. Actually, everyone's needs matter equally. But if your friend was staying over and you made them dinner, maybe you could always ask, "Hey, would you be willing to help me clean up the dishes?" But if you're like, "Hey, you need to clean up the dishes because I fed you," to your friend, it's kind of like, who likes that vibe, right? So a child doesn't like that vibe, So you can still, hey, would you be willing to help me with these dishes? And maybe like, hey, maybe you want to make a game at it and play a game while we clean up these dishes. Would you be up for that? We could sing a song and play make believe or do a trivia game or whatever. Not as a manipulation tool so much like, I'm going to try to get my child to do this with this carrot that I'm going to dangle. But just like, hey, would you want to have fun and we can get our needs met? We can get our needs for play and fun met. We could listen to music. We could get some needs met in that way. We could get needs met for just spending time together and sharing and connecting and supporting each other. And that's the giraffe consciousness. It's that we're making life more wonderful. And so there's not an expectation based on, I am your father and you are the son or the daughter. And like, in this family, we clean up the dishes and we contribute. And it's just literally just indoctrination. There's no appeal to self-interest or logic. It's just do this because I am training you, indoctrinating you, and basically just giving you the Kool-Aid of the family cult. Like, just to break it down to bare bones, like most families are cults. I know that word has a lot of charge to it, but like what I mean by that is just the idea that you abide by certain concepts without critical thinking. This is the way we do it in our family. End of story, right? Now, some parents might attempt to appeal to the reasons behind it, but if there's still the expectations that you do it no matter what, even if you don't want to, then we've slipped into indoctrination and demands and coercion versus requests and reason and negotiation and win-win, right? So if there's any dynamic that you're projecting because here's the expectation that you must fulfill, and the subtext unconsciously typically is, otherwise you'll lose love, otherwise you'll lose attachment, which is essential for the child. So the child will ultimately conform if necessary to ensure attachment and love. So these are all just top-down authoritarian dynamics, even if they're more subtle. And so the idea of role playing is so big here, and the idea of good parent and bad parent. And so this is where it's really worth breaking it down because it's so pervasive in the culture around good versus bad, around right versus wrong. And I think it's particularly strong for parents. It can happen in other relationships. What does it mean to be a good employee, a good student, a good friend, right? I think there's concept of friend, and we want to be a good friend. I'm going to be loyal and show up in certain ways. And so there's concepts there, which can also diminish authenticity and joy if we're doing it for that reason primarily, and we're sacrificing our own self-assertiveness and so forth. But if we let go of the good role, the good friend role, we choose to do things out of sovereign empowerment and authentic desire and perhaps compersion, right? I want to support my friend in helping them move because I feel joy knowing that they're receiving support from me and so forth. And so that's authentic relationship, right? And so with parenting, however, with parents, with child raising, it seems very frequent in the current conventional paradigm that the subtext for so many parents is, I want to be a good parent. The subtext, likely unconsciously, for so many parents is, I want to be a good parent. Even there's this modern authoritative parenting author who's burst onto the scene the past few years, Becky Kennedy, who wrote a whole book called Good Inside. And she has this sort of mantra that when a parent, if you get triggered and you do something you wish you hadn't done, go take a breather and go coach yourself and say, I'm a good parent, I'm a good parent, I'm a good parent. And I understand and perhaps even appreciate the intention and sentimentality there, the sentiment there, but she's just stuck in this parenting paradigm around the role playing. And so a lot of her advice is still, she's seeking to have more empathy, helping people have more empathy and for themselves and their children and so forth. And there's some ideas there that are more, in a sense, it's better than just, 1950s, just complete top down, do this because I said so, overt authoritarianism. But the thing is about any authoritative parenting paradigm, even if it's more infused with some empathy and so forth, is that we still haven't checked these premises. And so there's a lot of some of these authors that have some good ideas, but they haven't checked the premises. And so there's still this, well, it's my role as a parent to ensure my child gets good grades. And I'm going to see if I can use some empathy and reason to connect with them. But the elephant in the room is that the child doesn't want to go to school. And we're never going to talk about that. So this becomes the issue here. So this idea of good parent is very pervasive in authoritative parenting worlds and paradigms, which is very frequent in contemporary culture. Most parenting authors are still in that paradigm. And so the good parent thing, the good parent lens, the good parent role, I believe is very pervasive there, where the parent is viewing oneself as seeking to follow this blueprint, right? So like a good parent, you could do a whole sentence completion exercise. I'd be curious to see what, if I were to invite parents to do this and doing a sentence completion exercise and just finishing the sentence, a good parent means, right? So I bet a lot of people might subconsciously have assumptions around a good parent means ensuring my child is healthy. A good parent means ensuring my child wakes up and goes to bed on time. A good parent means ensuring that they're doing certain extracurricular activities, ensuring that they get good grades. A good parent means making sure that they're learning discipline and work ethic and doing chores. A good parent means being consistent and having consistent boundaries. A good parent means being strict and firm at times, but still loving and empathetic when you're being strict. A good parent means, ensuring that you live in a good zip code and you go to a good school. Your child goes to a good school. All sorts of things that could be in the blueprint for, well-meaning parents potentially. But I'm interested much more in actions versus intentions when it comes to raising children. That's why I'm sharing this idea with you, helping open up the paradigm here. And just, again, are you aware that there's a role that you might be playing in your life? Can you actually seek to observe that and maybe just connect back to just your authentic self? Just breathe and just come back to that. And then when it comes to parenting specifically, what assumptions about what is the blueprint that you have? And can you begin to question that consciously and subconsciously? And so wherever you are in your journey, that could mean you're just starting out to question these things. You're just beginning to peel back the layers of the onion in your own self-development and self-integration, in your own reflection of your own childhood. That could mean that you actually have a lot of this stuff clarified and that you actually are creating a win-win, peaceful parenting environment. By and large, you're not forcing your child to go to school. And maybe there's just some subtle things to examine here when it comes to day-to-day activities. Again, it could be just subtle expectations around everyone eats together at the same time in our family for dinner. And I actually believe that's a beautiful thing for families to eat dinner together. The question is there consent? And is it indoctrination or is it just desire-based? And so that's sort of the evolution process. Is that, again, that's another example with the dinner example. There's this communal, tribal kinship thing that is very beautiful. And there was a lot of tradition and history with humans eating meals together. And parents who want to insist on continuing that practice have a value of that community and connection and support that can ensue through shared meals together. And so the question is, can you do that and cultivate that in a family environment in a way that's not a demand, not a subtle expectation, that examines the elephant in the room around, well, does a child want to? And so it becomes more in the adult's responsibility to be creative and imaginative, to appeal to the child's self-interest. Appeal to the child's self-interest. It's a difference between an effective, high-integrity salesperson or a marketing person. Like, are you using manipulation tactics, or are you just fully respecting the other person's consent? So if you're fully respecting your child's consent, then it's on you to actually get curious about their desires, their needs, their experience, their preferences, their priorities. Maybe they want to go play outside at 6:30 p.m. And so the more convenient default pattern is to just be in that old role that you've inherited, that mindset and assumptions around, hey, it's dinner time, you must come in, and now it's time to eat. Versus, can you start pausing in these types of moments? Can you start taking a walk and reflecting and see if you can come up with 10 ideas for new imaginative ways to cultivate win-win relationships and win-win solutions so that you can get your needs met and the child can get his or her needs met as well. Your desires, your values, right? Is there a way to cultivate authentic, organic, desire-led intrinsically motivated family meal times. That could be a whole meta conversation. And so it really goes back to, are you cultivating a relationship with your child in all moments where the child actually trusts you and there's not this lecture like expectation vibe in all these other moments, and there's actually genuine respect and trust. And the more you have that, the easier it is to have conversations and make requests. Hey, I would love to have dinner with the whole family. Like, that's a desire I have. Would you be willing to talk about that with me? Now, if there's a lot of baggage and a lot of backstory and a lot of unprocessed stuff and unprocessed dynamics where the child has their autonomy has been transgressed upon, then they probably wouldn't feel a desire to have that conversation with you. They're like, okay, you want unconsciously, they might think, well, you want me to like have dinner with the family. Okay, I don't really want to do that because you don't, respect my desires, right? So if there's that unprocessed baggage, that's actually the more important thing to address to restore the relationship. So if you've been in a conventional role-playing, any sort of top-down authoritative parenting paradigm with your children so far, there's always a new chance to turn things around, right? But it takes acknowledging some of that, and that could be a whole process, right? However, if most of your history in the relationship has actually been, the interpersonal space has been valued, has been respected, and hasn't been autonomy battles, then like it actually could be a legitimate thing to express, and the child might be very interested to hear about your desire. Hey, I have a desire for all 5 of us to sit down at least like 4 days a week and have a solid hour where we just eat together and we talk. That's my desire. Would you be willing to hear more about that? Like, is that something that you're interested in talking about? And then hopefully they actually desire to hear about your desires because you've built up social capital with them. You've desired to hear about their desires, and there's like a mutuality there. If there is a mutuality there, then the child might actually be interested in your desires. But that takes trust, and that's a new paradigm. That might seem impossible or idealistic or whatever. But the question is it impossible, or is it that it's much more difficult if you have a history of top-down dynamics? So if you neutralize and restore any of those dynamics and you come back to a baseline, clean slate, and we're actually rebuilding this whole relationship based on consent and trust and respective autonomy. And then once you are back at that clean slate, you can actually have a dynamic that is appealing to the child's self-interest. And once that's neutralized, any resentment or whatnot, psychologically, you've processed that, and we've decided we want a new way of being from now on. Now, there's actually an opportunity for the child and parent to have a real relationship. It's based on openness and honesty and curiosity and creativity so that everyone can have a more wonderful life. So if your desire is to have family dinner a few days a week, then when there's a security and a trust and respect between you and the child might actually be interested to hear about your desire. And then you can communicate openly. And the child might actually be like, "Oh, tell me more about that. I didn't realize you had that desire. Thank you for sharing that." Like, it actually just be literally a mature conversation. And the child would be like, "Oh, I want to learn about that more, about your desire. I'm not sure if I'm willing to." Right? There could be all sorts of open conversation. The child expresses, "Well, I want to go play outside at that time," or "I don't like to sit down for that long at dinner," or there could be all sorts of things that could be expressed. And then we can get shared understanding between both parties. And when there's shared understanding for each party's needs, and perspectives. And then now we get the opportunity to be imaginative. Can we brainstorm 10 ideas of ways that we could both win here? And maybe there's only 2 of them that are actually viable. But if you get into the mode of win-win imagination, now you can actually find those solutions. But we need to start with coercion-free. We need to start with authentic relating and request-based consciousness that's willing to respect the child's no. If the child has a no, then we respect the no, and then we can pivot from there in the communication. But we have a principle of respecting the child's will. And when we have that principle, then we get to tap into creativity. And the more you follow and honor that principle, the more and more trust is built. The child is not developing any resentments. The child is not developing any defense mechanisms, any parts of themselves that are trying to skirt around the rules and this type of thing, because the child can relax, knowing the parent is not going to expect and make and coerce them to do things. So the guard never develops. Or if it was developed in the past and then you started healing it and you started rebuilding trust, over time the guard relaxes and goes away. And now we have an atmosphere of openness and wholeness and self-led living for both humans, for both the tall human and the small human. Everyone has access to that capital S self. And that capital S self is curious and creative. And the desire comes to the fore, the desire to get one's needs met, and the desire to respect the needs of others, and for everyone's needs to get met. Self-fullness, not self-sacrifice, not selfishness, but rather the integration of valuing self and valuing other selves, which is win-win. So that's the invitation. Whether you are a current parent and you're recognizing there's been a pattern of top-down, or you're recognizing that you feel fear around new paradigms and you have some self-healing to do around that, connecting to your own child self. Or maybe you're an aspiring parent and you really want to prepare yourself the way that I want to prepare myself, have been for so long, by grokking these concepts and doing the self-healing and self-integration and understanding the principles and the strategies that are possible in the new paradigm. Then you get to start on day one with your future children with as much clarity and wholeness as possible. Having broken the cycles as much as possible with your own self-integration and self-healing, and your own conceptual apparatus about the principles of coercion-free, the principles of win-win, the principles of self-ownership, the principles of consent. When you've integrated that, when you've secured that in your neural pathways through neuroplasticity, now we can enter that new paradigm. So all sorts of possibilities when we let go of the role playing and we let go of the good versus bad as well. So much of this good parenting versus bad parenting it's just common, and then it ends up where parents are seeking to battle shame and guilt and seeking to combat shame and guilt. So when one makes an error and maybe defaults to an old paradigm strategy and projects something, or steps into a top-down energy, and then if we're in this mindset of that's a bad parent, then we end up just stimulating shame and guilt. The only reason shame and guilt exist is because of the concepts and paradigm of good versus bad. Shame being you're a bad person, guilt meaning you did a bad thing, right? So you actually scoop all of that psychology out and you heal that and you let go of that, you don't experience shame and guilt anymore. If you just gone beyond right doing and wrong doing and you enter the field of giraffe consciousness, then even when you do something that actually didn't meet needs, that actually impacted someone and contributed to them being hurt, and you're out of integrity in that way because you had a part of you that wasn't healed, that stepped into the seat of the consciousness and took over the steering wheel, and you defaulted to an old way of being, which I've experienced for sure in my experience with children. And so if we can let go of just shaming and guilting ourselves in the role-playing thing, and you just recognize it for what it is, that there was a part of you that was seeking to get a need met in that moment, and we actually have compassion for that and curiosity for that part, knowing that it came from a past experience and likely from childhood conditioning, and we can actually accept and enter into guiltless mistake correcting. We enter into guiltless mistake correcting. Now we're back into giraffe consciousness. We're back into self-led living, and we're back into authenticity. Back into authenticity versus this yo-yoing of, oh, I did this thing. Oh, that was bad. Shame. And you think that's going to help you grow, but it's actually just keeping you in that paradigm versus just shedding that. How can I meet my needs more effectively in the future? And we let go of the shame and guilt. We let go of the good versus bad parenting, that whole role play. And it's just, oh, I'm a human. I'm a tall human, and I have a small human who is living in my home for whom I'm responsible for their upbringing and so forth. Okay, that's the fact. Okay, how can I choose strategies that respect everyone's needs and to nurture everyone's needs? And just giving yourself encouragement in that process. And you can even be open with the child. Like, hey, I'm learning to enter this new way of parenting and this new way of doing things. Because when I was a child, I didn't get that so much. You can say things like that, and you can just enter on the hero's journey of growth and move forward into that new paradigm, into the new possibilities. So thank you for listening, and hope this has been valuable. And feel free to reach out if you ever want to open up a conversation. Shoot me an email. My email is on my website, joelbine.com. And I'd be happy to hear from you and open up this conversation around this precious topic. It's very meaningful to share about this, and I'm very grateful for your interest. And much love, and talk to you next time.